Thanks for joining us on today's episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast. We're privileged to speak with Matt Swenson. Matt is the Nestlé Coffee Partners Director of Coffee. He works in the technical and product side of the business, helping plan for the next big innovation in the coffee pipeline. Prior to joining Nestlé Coffee Partners, Swenson was Chameleon's Chief Product Officer. He is one of only 51 Q Grader Arabica Instructors in the world and serves on the Board of Trustees for the Coffee Quality Institute. Listen in as we discuss the RTD market in coffee, sustainability at Nestlé, and his involvement with the CQI. Enjoy. Let's get into it. Welcome, Norbert. It's exciting to do one of our final episodes for the year, and with an exciting guest today. How are you, man?
Oh, I'm super. I'm stoked. I'm very happy.
Sick. No, it's exciting to welcome Matt Swenson from Nestlé onto the podcast. Welcome, Matt. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. How are you all doing?
All is good.
Fantastic. Yes. Very happy, Matt. This is exciting. It has been a while since we have talked, and it's been a while since we met many years ago. So I'm very happy to have you here on the podcast, and also very happy to reconnect to the time where it all started, kind of, at least that I got that feeling. So if you could talk a little bit about you, introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, I think, first off, Norbert, I think last time I saw you was on the other side of the SCA floor. This SCA was funny because it was the first time we'd all seen each other in so many years, and you were definitely the popular guy at the party. I couldn't get within 10 or 20 feet of you. You're surrounded by people, but we shared a glance on the from the walkway there, and glad to reconnect today and have a chat. But so yeah, my name is Matt Swenson. I'm the director of coffee at Nestlé. And more specifically, Nestlé Coffee Partners, based in the U.S. And so we have a division based in Seattle that I report into. And in the U.S., we do all the sales and marketing work for brands like Nescafe. We have a Starbucks licensing deal for the roast and ground, and some of the CPG products. And then also Blue Bottle as well. We have some CPG products there. So yeah, it's in Seattle's best as well through Starbucks. So it's a really exciting role that I started just about 2 years ago, and it's been great to kind of take a high level approach on the CPG side of things and look at how big companies manage portfolios and be a part of that on the inside. It's really fascinating work, and it's vastly different from what I have done in the past, but it's really cool to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, do you want to walk us through a little bit your history? Because when we first met, that was around Pulley Collective in New York, and shared roasting. The company was very different, smaller. I think the enthusiasm is still there, so I can still feel that, which is great. Could you talk a little bit about your history, how everything came about so far?
Sure. I mean, I when you hear the origin stories of people getting into coffee, it's everyone is atypical, right? And so I kind of have that typical story of where I just started working in coffee in high school as a barista in a little drive-through coffee shop in Indiana. And it was that style of shop where you had 50 different flavored syrups on the wall, and push this button for small, push this button for medium and large, and that was the extent of it. And I honestly fell more in love with the customer service aspect than the coffee itself at first, and being part of someone's day really got me hooked. And then about a year into it, I had this one manager from Seattle that I came in after school, and he had clearly had way too many espressos. This was, I'm dating myself, but this was back in 2000, so about 22 years ago. And before, spittoons were in fashion. So he was probably drinking all the espresso, but he's like, Matt, come here, you gotta try this, And he pulled 2 shots of espresso, a 20-second and a 30-second shot. And he's like, taste the difference. And it was such like a visceral moment for me. I still remember that exact day where I tasted those, and it was just like my mind exploded. It was just like instant curiosity. I have a very scientific mindset, and that was just when I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. This is a a whole world of exploration. And that excitement quickly turned to guilt, because then I'm like, oh man, I've been serving awful espresso for so many customers. But that was the inspiring portion, right? It's like, wow, now I'm just like getting a glimpse into how to build better coffee for customers. And that was, I was 16 or 17 years old at that time. And yeah, 20 some years ago. It's kind of sad to admit that. But anyway, we've kind of gone, I've done several things here and there, but I moved out to New York to follow my now wife, and I'd started working for Dallas Brothers Coffee, and then Norbert. When we met, I was at Noble Tree Coffee, and so I was the first U.S. employee that the CEO and founder had hired, and it was pretty scrappy, right? We were literally starting with just a concept at first. And where we had to build our roasting facility from a shared roasting facility where it was me and a handful of others that were literally doing everything. Filling up the roaster, filling up the bags, putting stamps on it, sample roasting, doing all of our QC, all within our little time frame of a window at the shared roasting facility, while we were building ours across the pier. And that was a really fun time, right? Because it was super tangible, right? It was really hard work, a lot of heavy loads and all those things, but man, it was really incredible. And that company we had acquired some farms and a milling and export operation, and so really got to dive in deep on the agricultural side of coffee, and work with our roast master to dial in the curves, and ultimately touch literally every part of the supply chain in a very tangible and realistic way. So that's kind of where we met, and where I got started from the New York side. And then my wife and I were engaged to get married, and we wanted to start a family, and we both agreed that we want to do that, but not in New York City. And so this Chameleon opportunity just popped up, and I joined Chameleon Cold Brew, moved to Austin, Texas, and then fast forward a few years, we were acquired by Nestlé, and then I joined the Nestlé proper team about 2 years ago. So it's been kind of a rocket ship ride, and when I think back to those beginnings, I haven't told that story of being in the drive-through, but the thing that got me interested in coffee initially, with that shot of espresso and even the customer service, is just there are so many endless opportunities to learn within coffee, right? So many buckets. I mean, this is if you like agronomy, you have the plant sciences, you have the science of coffee and extraction, water, even roasting, all these things. And so it's always afforded me the opportunity to learn more and more through this industry, and it's always kept me curious and kept me inspired to keep going.
So one thing I've asked guests this in the past, but one thing I've learned is that a lot of coffee professionals are very curious people. Would you consider yourself a curious person, or is that something that just kind of came out of you working more in coffee? I mean, have you always been curious, or?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's an engineer, and I have his kind of like tinkering mindset. Sounds bizarre, but one of my favorite classes in college was physics, only because it just answered basic questions of like how the world works, And so I think that drives a lot of my curiosity, is just always figuring out how does something work. And even if I don't understand it, that's just opportunity, right, to learn. And going back to that endless opportunity, it's like, yeah, these coffee plants, those are cool. Let's figure out how those grow and how those work, and like processing. Ooh, let's play in this sandbox for a minute. And so it's just kind of developed this skill set over years, and it's just that of curiosity. And so, I've got a 3-year-old son, and I'm very happy that can already tell he's a super curious fella, because he's always asking, why, how are these made? And it's kind of cool to see that passed down.
It's so cool, man. I love it.
Yeah.
And I honestly think physics is not the most boring subject at all. I think it's a very interesting one, and it can be boring for people who just don't feel the connection, and it's fine, right? I have other subjects that I would have indicated as boring.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
But
difference between fascinating and getting good grades in it. Let me make that clarification.
yeah, exactly.
It is extremely difficult, but it's really fascinating and to understand,
But also
how the
like
world works.
in its own abstract way, I feel like I've heard a lot of like entrepreneurs doing this, but like you can pull by reading literature and other subject matter that like is not specific to your field or whatever, you can pull a lot of those kinds of ideas and theories and apply it to whatever it is you work in, like biology or physics or engineering or whatever it is. So,
Mhm.
it's not the most abstract thing to be interested in physics, I think, as a coffee professional. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So one thing I'm curious on is, at least the past 2 years, you've spoken a lot about like the RTD sector of coffee, and its growth. Can you tell us a little bit like what encapsulates RTD beverages in the coffee industry and what that growth has kind of looked like in coffee throughout your work in coffee?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so typically when we think of RTD coffee or ready to drink, it's you can think of the coolers at the gas station, right? Where you have your canned and bottled beverages that you can pop the top. They're sealed. Um, for myself and a lot of the listeners of this podcast, we probably think of like the little blue bottle cans or the Stumptown, the glass bottles, things like that. But
Mm.
the array of RTD within coffee is pretty vast. I mean, it goes anything down to the Frappuccino from Starbucks, and one that surprised me initially is Monster Energy drinks has a Monster Java, and most probably would never even consider that a coffee RTD beverage from a specialty coffee perspective. Um, but when we start looking at the data and parsing out the sources of the data and the high selling SKUs, like Monster Java is a really good performing SKU within RTD coffee. And
Mm.
so it's a really wide range of products. But at the end of the day, it's just anything that's ready to drink, sealed, things like that. So there are other things out there that are kind of mistaken as RTD. So you'll have multi-serve bottles that there is technically a step of preparation that you have to pour it into a glass. Um,
Mhm.
because you can't just drink 48 ounces of it. That would not be considered RTD, or if you have concentrates that you might need to have a dilution step in, or like cold brew instant coffee. These types of things aren't necessarily um, RTD per se, but they're all kind of in this little ecosystem of cold brew coffee ish.
So instant is not RTD.
No, no, because it has a step, right? You've got to uh, reintroduce water to it, and so although
Mhm.
it's pretty close to being ready,
Mhm.
ready to drink is quite literally pop open that top and chug it down.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What's the
Yeah.
meaning of RTD to the world in the coffee to the coffee world?
What's the meaning to it today?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I think could mean a few different things, but ultimately it's broadening coffee products to a larger range of folks. Like I mentioned a gas station. Historically, if you look back 20, 30 years ago, a lot of people would really balk at the idea of getting coffee from a gas station.
Hmm.
However, a lot of gas stations have recognized that and sees the opportunity where they're upping their game on not only brewed coffee, but also getting a broader range of products in their coolers that are either chilled coffee or cold brew, and less sweetened than say the average Coca-Cola or something in there. And so from that perspective, it offers different income uh, opportunity for different roasters and brands to expand just beyond roast and ground coffee. And on the flip side, it can be a brand builder for certain brands to extend their touch points. If they're only, offered in the center store in the aisle, maybe this will get them on the outer aisle. Or if they only have cafes, they can extend that experience down to the grocery store or the C store. So there's a whole slew of ideas, but I think it represents new opportunities more than anything.
It's super interesting. With your definition, it also means it does not necessarily fall into that spectrum of where traditional coffee has been drank as a warm, hot beverage, right? Since RTD cannot be served hot, it's automatically something a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah, you've seen some of those trends play out with the coffee shop and the food service sector of the business with cafes. The number of beverages being sold that are cold is increasing and has increased for so many years that it's just like if you took a 10-year nap, the landscape of a cafe P&L would be radically different than what it would be 10 years ago. And we're seeing a lot of different things transfer on that. Consumer trends are going cold because they like it. And when we start looking at younger generations, especially in Gen Z, I mean, they're drinking coffee for a whole new occasion, right? And so our parents back in the day, you have your one cup in the morning, you get your mental agility or your energy, and then you put it away for the rest of the day, right? And that's evolved over time. And a lot of folks are looking at cold as refreshment. And so, especially when you look at Gen Zs, they're looking at this as an opportunity to have an afternoon pick me up that is refreshing, right? And very few people in the older generations, I think, would refer to coffee as refreshing, right? Some may, but it's opened up this opportunity to really fill that gap or need state or whatever for this younger generation, and allow them to explore cold coffee by offering more varieties, more flavors, more combinations of things that is really drove that growth. And then in tandem with that, then they can, if they really have a good experience in the cafe, then they can go to the grocery store or wherever and recreate that using RTD products. And so again, from that brand extension piece, it really offers the comprehensive experience, so to speak.
But that also puts a lot of pressure on the product to extend the coffee experience you have in an environment where water is controlled. Well, you can control water in RTD, but where the everything preparation wise is controlled to a drink which might sit on the shelf for some time. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's funny when you start getting into this, I would call it maybe a little naive when I was getting into it, where I'm like, this
That's
is
where my
like,
questions come from, because I have no reference, and I know you're the right person to talk to.
It was my naiveness. But when I was first getting into RTD and seeing that, I'm like, this is a full new era of coffee. This is like what we all have dreamed of, right? Where you look at a winemaker, and generally speaking, you have some aging in bottles and stuff, but generally the winemaker, whatever they put in the bottle, they're able to pass to the consumer, and they have that experience, right? There's no different dosing levels of your portafilter. There's no different roast levels. Like the winemaker makes that decision, bottles it, and then the consumer has that exact experience, right? More or less, but generally. And so I'm getting into RTD and thinking, this is amazing. We can do all this stuff and control the experience for the consumer. And more or less, you still can. However, there's a whole different array of different things that are happening that make it a little bit more challenging to do that, right? Because what you called out, shelf life, right? It's not necessarily you bottle this and then it sells within 2 weeks, or, maybe it's 3 months, or maybe your supply chain's a little complex and it's 3 or 4 months or 6 months even. And how do you control that experience over that time period? And that's where, um, you know, was the fun part for me, kind of diving in and tinkering in and looking at what are the changes over time that do that. But um, yeah, it's certainly a challenge to maintain that. But there's certain things that you have to do as well, right? And so one thing is getting into RTD. You have to process cold brew generally. You might not have to in certain cases, but when I say that, it's interesting because roast and ground coffee, and as coffee roasters, we've ultimately had a hall pass from the FDA and any regulation body for forever, right? Because coffee as a roast and ground hot beverage is pretty darn safe, right? Like, if there's any contaminants coming into the green coffee, there's a kill step, right? They're being roasted in a roaster, high temperatures over a halfway long time, or halfway decently long time. And then after that, they're packaged, and then they're ground and they're brewed in really hot water. So as far as I know, and I've certainly been wrong many times before, but there's not been like a food sickness or some sort of foodborne outbreak from hot coffee or roast and ground coffee, right? Because it's typically consumed pretty immediately, within 30 minutes, an hour, maybe 6 hours at the most or something. But so that's been safe. When we start getting to RTD, I've been saying for years that we're no longer in the coffee industry. We're in the beverage industry. And part of that is because there's a whole new set of rules that has to be followed in this landscape, right? Because we get into something called low acid beverages, which I'll be honest, I had never heard of before we started getting into this. But what that calls out is beverages that are above 4.6 pH. Coffee's between 5 and 6. And so what that means is it's not really shelf stable or food safe on its own. And so there's a few ways to get around that. And the first one is just have a cold distribution chain. So you can produce it and then keep it refrigerated until the consumer. But your shelf life is really small, but that's kind of like the purest of pure ways to deliver your cold coffee. But the other one is to process it, whether it's done through like retort or aseptic or hot fill. These types of things could make it shelf stable, and you can start distributing it at ambient temperatures and be on the shelf out of the refrigerator. And so that sort of thing there protects it from, say, botulism, right? But again, botulism is something we haven't heard much of in like the last 50, maybe 100 years because of food processing and its rise. But it's basically a bacteria that coffee is susceptible to in packaged formats if you don't process it properly. And so that's a serious thing that's where the FDA really gets involved and hammers down. So yeah, that's processing and something we have to take food safety very, very carefully for.
So I don't know if this is getting too much into the science or the technical part of it, but I am curious to know why botulism is could be more of an issue on the cold coffee side versus like regular roasted in a coffee bag side, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it has to do with the pH and the water activity, right? And so if the pH the pH of roast and ground, there's no liquid there, so it's not really having a liquid pH. And the water activity is low and safe for roast and ground coffee. So as that's distributed, super safe. But when you start adding water, it increases the water activity and has the increased pH. And so it just creates an environment where botulism could, or a lot of bacteria could live potentially. It's not saying that it's rampant in them at all, but it's always at 0.0001% that you got to take into consideration for.
But what you're also saying, not only for a food safety perspective, but probably also from a experience perspective, I should not brew my coffee in the morning, have it sit on my cup for the whole day and drink it next morning.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but again, coffee is pretty resilient to most of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in that experience here, 24 hours is not a significant time period.
Mm-hmm.
We have to think of, if we have a 6-month shelf life or a 12-month shelf life,
Mm-hmm.
that's a completely different ballgame there.
And then do you think like, because obviously water in certain types of environments and certain types of cities is all different. Does that have an effect on like how what that timeline for botulism could look like, whether like cold brew is processed in like the tropics where water is significantly different versus like, up here in North America where bacteria and germs are different? I don't know. It's kind of something popped in.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not in terms of that. I mean, that's more of a bacteria issue, but I will say on water, what's interesting is when I first had joined Chameleon, we had this tagline that said like Texas Hill Country Water. And I was like, oh man, this is kind of a cool, funny tagline, but we'll go with it. And then I started realizing there was like a bunch of really popular cold brew brands out of Austin. Like Austin was like the hub of national cold brew brands. And I didn't really think much of it. There's a lot of CPG brands based in Austin, but we went on a deep dive with water and started like testing different municipalities and testing all that stuff, and realized that Texas water, Texas Hill Country water, really had a high pH, and it just kind of worked with whatever our municipality's water was. Worked really well with cold brew, and it was really fascinating to see that, and it was like, wow, that tagline was really onto something there.
Enjoying this episode of the Coffee and Technology podcast? This podcast would not be possible without the support of Cropster. Whether it's tracking harvest yields, roastery and inventory management, or simply tracking brew recipes, Cropster Origin, Cropster Roast, and Cropster Cafe can help you streamline your workflows and help you operate more efficiently.
Can you speak a little bit about the impacts on flavor and on that experiences when we talk about larger shelf lives?
Sure. I mean, you have to start looking at spoilage within there, and oftentimes over a long period of time, you'll get something called pH drift. And so maybe if your pH starts a little higher, it starts to reduce over time, and that we don't, or at least I don't really know a lot of those, what's actually causing that from a scientific or microscopic perspective. But typically you'll see that, and over time the coffee will just get a little bit more sour and acidic and lose some of its depth of character, and it's just not as good. So obviously fresher is always better, even if you take in the food safety steps. It could be safe for 2 years, it just might not taste good.
I think that's where my specialty coffee experience comes from. So we always try to define specialty above a certain zero line. So everything below is controlling defects and controlling bad outcome. And everything below that line is like adding to the experience and doing something beyond. And maybe that's also worth a conversation of like, how does specialty kind of intersect with that segment where it's a lot more controlled, it's a lot more standardized. Potentially you lose some flavors or some aspects of your product. What's the real opportunities for specialty or high specialty coffee for an RTD? Is there any?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot. I mean, you can make interesting and beautiful coffees, whether it's done by cold brew or it's done, like a flash brew, something like that. It certainly can be done and be that brand extension for folks, right? You can experiment it and have that, and then as long as you have your consumer base, it's great, right? It's a great way to experience it in a different way. It might not be as aromatic because you don't have the heat, drawing those in. But absolutely, I mean, even specialty coffee is a fantastic and almost necessary in many ways in cold brew because of the natural sweetness in the coffee and the big body as opposed to a commercial coffee. That really adds that depth in a cold brew coffee.
Cool. Yeah, that's amazing. So it is something to consider for specialty brands to tap their toes into.
Yeah, absolutely.
But really, so going back really quick on the idea of consumer trends, because this conversation kind of made me think about it. Earlier, you talked a lot about Gen Z and like their experience in RTD products. And when I think of RTD products, I think of it as like kind of like an accessible approach to get into specialty coffee for some consumers who are interested, but don't necessarily like want to go into a cafe or have the means to like get all the equipment to do pour overs and whatever it is. But I'm curious to know like what has been the level of acceptance for RTD products among like generational differences. Like obviously, it's very popular among younger people, but has that been kind of the same wave for the older generation, or have they accepted it the way young people have? And what's that kind of look like? And is there even a generational difference in RTD consumer trends?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about more on the specialty RTD side. I can't necessarily talk about the other spectrum. But yeah, typically a lot of those consumers are millennial and below from an age range, right? Because it's more of this new adapting of something new and trying experimenting, and that's what I'm kind of, I think, what they call a geriatric millennial. So I'm like just on the millennial cusp, right? So I still have my millennial card, but I almost timed out. But the idea being that that generation is much more open to new experiences and new things, and less about the historical. I have this brand of coffee because I brewed it for 50 years and I'm not changing. And so it's a little bit different. My this is completely anecdotal, but my dad just does not understand RTD coffee, right? He tries it to be nice, but for him it's just he has his routine, he sticks with it, and he'll try some cold coffee every now and then and smile and walk away. Yeah, it's great.
What's the potential impact on the consumer? So I'm just thinking, right? When Coke came, or like all those other sodas, they came with a high sugar content, and that was not fully understood, I guess, from the get-go. It was appreciated, and then suddenly those drinks became bigger and bigger, larger and larger, and the health impacts came with with that dynamic. What about a coffee you can drink more easily, have more accessible? Would that mean that we have more people under a high influence of caffeine? And or sugar potentially? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think when you start looking at consumer data among all coffee consumers, different reports share different data, but the numbers are between 60 to 80% of consumers whiten their coffee, and that's a little bit less on adding sugar. But the great vast majority of consumers in America use milk and sugar for their coffee, right? That might not be the specialty consumer that's buying micro lots from the cafe or pour overs, but the vast majority is. And so if you compare it to a soda, for instance, even that will likely have a little bit less sugar, have a little bit less maybe calorie impact than some of those sodas. And so I think there's at least years ago, there was a drift towards a more healthier outlook. And so I think that's where RTD coffee is offering a great solution to where, yeah, there might be some products that are lightly sweetened or whitened with a milk or alt milk. But there's also a whole array of products that are unsweetened and black, which offer that energy and caffeine without the additional calorie content. And so that's an exciting portion. I think that has been one of the small components that's also added to this this massive growth over the
Mhm.
last decade in RTD, just offering new experiences and new products to people that are looking for that sort of thing.
It's the new healthy energy drink.
Yeah. And not only that, when you look at the younger generation, the Instagram generation, um, not only are they looking for like these colorful, fun experiences, they're looking for variety and transparency in ingredients, right? And coffee,
Mhm.
if done properly, you can have a lot of transparency. You can have a lot of storytelling around the coffee that you're serving, whether it's in the cafe or relatively new in a bottle at the grocery store. And so that sort of transparency is something that is driving a lot of these younger consumers in their purchasing habits.
So what's the opportunity for the farmer? Is there any specific opportunities for them with RTDs? Is it just because they can sell more product, or as you say, is there like more traceability opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything, right? Having a good relationship with a good buyer is always solid for the farmer and the roaster.
Mhm.
And so depending on your style, you could have a very specific need of green coffee that will translate to a good cold brew down the line. And so I think working with roasters and vice versa to have that stable supply of a good base for your cold brew, it's a great opportunity, right? And the other piece, that this is kind of a funny sidestep, but it's very real, is when you start looking at cold brew versus hot coffee and the different coffee content that's actually in the cup. You start looking at the caffeine content
Mhm.
within cold brew, and people call it rocket fuel, all this stuff because it's so highly caffeinated. Um, and what's driving that? It's not that it's necessarily been brewing for like 20 years. Part of it is that it's just being served at a higher TDS or higher strength. And so, typical drip cup of coffee might be 1.25 TDS, where cold brew on the RTD side at the average market is around 1.5 TDS. And so you're seeing a lot more coffee in each cup or glass or bottle of cold brew. And so that's the interesting part about the volume of coffee is we're actually selling more of the coffee to consumers on a
Mhm.
on a per glass basis through that.
And that translated also into the caffeine content.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How much caffeine can one take a day?
400 milligrams. I know this because my wife was recently pregnant, and so I had to do. She's like, "What kind of how much of this cold brew can I drink?" And I'm like looking at old lab reports. Like I'm the only person that has like caffeine reports that to break it down. I'm like, all right, 5 or 6 ounces here, add this amount, and this will be like the exact milligrams of caffeine to watch during pregnancy.
Right, right.
Uh,
I mean, I saw that already when when I was in high school. I think the energy drinks came up, and it was one of the big, I think, news back then. Oh yeah, it's the amazing amount of caffeine which is in one of those cans, and
mhm.
I feel half guilty as an Austrian to be part of that development or that
Yeah.
but anyway, it just happened, and now it's globally available, and I think cold brew comes kind of into that segment, right?
Yeah, increased caffeine
And
without the sugar necessarily, but
right,
yeah,
right,
same
yeah,
style. It's funny. I just saw one of those Mini Coopers with the can on
yeah,
top, back from the 90s or early 2000s. Is brilliant marketing.
yeah. It's still going. I know. I,
Yeah.
I saw I saw them do on Saturday. I went to the movies and I saw them going around handing out cans. It's like,
Yeah.
Oh man, nice.
yeah.
So going back to Norbert's question about farmers, I wanted, or not necessarily about farmers,
Mhm.
but that kind of subject. I was curious to know, what are some of the outside of RTD, the RTD work you're doing, but what are some of the initiatives or projects that maybe Nestle's doing at Origin or in general in the coffee industry that not a lot of people may not know about or have heard of? Be really interesting to hear more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's the one thing that, or not the one thing. This is one of the most fascinating things about Nestle to me is the sheer scale. Right, we're the largest coffee um, brand or coffee roaster in the world. Right, we sell more coffee than anyone, and the biggest buyer of green coffee globally. And so, when you look at our Nescafe brand in specific, this is a mind blowing statistic, but 1 out of every 7 coffee cups in the world is Nescafe. Like that is mind blowing, isn't it?
It is
Um,
totally.
and in the US, that it's extra hard to comprehend because Nescafe, I mean, instant coffee, when you look at the entire CPG market, instant coffee as a whole represents 5% of the US CPG market. So it's very small. Um, But so when we start thinking about that, that's where we have incredible market share in countries all over the world.
Mhm.
And with that, it there's a lot of responsibility for that sort of size and scale. And so with Nescafe in particular, we just launched our Nescafe 2030 plan. And so we've already been doing this incredible plan for 10 years with focusing on the farmer and the technical assistance and support of farmers globally. But this new plan has an increased focus and a more streamlined focus on regenerative agriculture
Mhm.
and really doing a lot of work in some of these countries where we buy significant volumes of coffee to really dive in and help look at regenerative practices, increase the volume out of these farms in a more sustainable way, look at better ways to manage the farm in a more natural way, and really look at the health of the soil first and foremost, and balance the ecosystem on the farm. And so with that, there's a whole bunch of other initiatives that are all kind of working in tandem together, with a strong focus on farmer livelihoods, right? Because we've all in the specialty side, especially we talk about the farmer a lot, right? But we have to really dig in and figure out what the challenges are of particular farmers, of particular farmer clusters, because what might work in Colombia might not work in Indonesia,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So you have to have localized solutions, and this is where having a scale like the brand of Nescafe is incredibly powerful. And I'm really proud that we're wielding that power in a really positive way to help lift up the farmer and help drive some of these sustainability practices over the long term, right? Because we've all seen those studies, right, with the climate change happening,
Mhm.
the suitable land for coffee is going to decrease, but we're all still going to want really delicious coffee. And so we're at that crossroads where um, we have to start doing more. And this Nescafe plan is an incredibly ambitious plan. I think we're investing $1 billion in it over the next 10 years to really
Mhm.
drive that for our farming partners.
That's huge, and that's that's a scale we are very um, we rarely come across, of course, when we talk to smaller brands or to some of our friends in other industries. So
Hmm.
for sure, that's a very different type of scenario here. And
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the greatest personal interest of mine with working within coffee of in Nestle is just the we can just have like a small if I personally could just have the smallest little incremental change for a more sustainable future within one of these brands, that is just magnitudes above what I could do with a smaller brand, and that's what really drives me every day is looking at that because some tiny little change can change so much out there through the scale, and so that's what keeps me excited every day now.
yeah, you got a substantial different lever. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, for me, this is actually, it's still something that I don't want to say mind blowing, but I think about all the time because I still have moments of understanding how big the coffee industry is. Like, like the magnitude of which, like, like companies like Nestle buy coffee and roast coffee. Like it's still something I'm still trying to grapple, because I'm used to, the small micro roasteries, and that's not a lot of coffee compared to like the global scale. So hearing these kinds of numbers and initiatives, you know, with every time, it helps me get a hold on like actually understanding like how big coffee is, that sometimes like we don't realize um on like on a micro level. So it's fascinating for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Sweet. And then on that too, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about, recently you were you got onto the board of the Coffee Quality Institute. Can you tell us a little bit about your
Yeah.
involvement there? What that kind of process has been like, and what, the future will look like for you and on the CQI, on the
Yeah.
board of CQI?
Yeah. So I've had some involvement with Coffee Quality Institute for the past decade or so, right? I've started being a Q grader about 11 years ago. And that was single-handedly one of the best decisions I ever made for my career. Just kind of understanding the shared language of coffee quality. And I still talk to some of the people I took my test with years and years ago, right? You actually had one of them, Ricardo, from Allied. Me and him took a test together, over a decade ago. And yeah, we still joke about that. But yeah, that was a really moving experience to really test myself and learn more and more about coffee. And I continue to follow that path, and that helped me um, land other opportunities just by being a Q grader. And so from there, I joined the Coffee Corps, which there's not a whole lot of that going on now. Something we hope to revive as an organization, but this is where I got to go on these trips to. I went to Yemen in 2014 and spoke at a conference there to connect and make market linkages. Um, I did a few different trips to Myanmar several years ago, and at the time I was a buyer, and so I was creating these relationships through these nonprofit mission trips, and through that I found suppliers and started relationships through doing some of this work. And it's been really instrumental to grow, not just for me, but also for some of our brands. And so then I became a Q instructor. And so I'm one of, I think there's around 50 or so instructors out there. But that really allowed me to kind of continue to be active in the community, and continue to talk sensory and leverage some of the learnings that I had, especially when I was previous companies as a buyer, and also working closely with our farms in Brazil. Had a lot of great learnings that I'm able to share and attach to that to these sensory courses, and look at cause effect relationships, and just be part of helping bring in the next generation of leaders within the industry. Um, and so that's always been super rewarding. And then I had the opportunity to join the board, and it's like dream come true, right? Because this is all driving the mission of the organization forward. We're a fully independent nonprofit that has this kind of like built-in neutrality, so gives us credibility if we want to have certain coffees certified as Q certified, and things like that. Which Nespresso, by the way, just launched 2 SKUs that are Q certified coffees. So that's been really great as a Nestle employee, and now a member of the board. That's really special to see. And yeah, we just want to drive the mission forward, and help improve the livelihoods of farmers. And so it's cool to be able to do that on the professional level through our normal everyday operating at Nestle at scale, and then also to help drive that on the industry wide sector at CQI. So I'm still new. I've been on one board meeting so far, but I can't wait for it to continue to keep going.
That's amazing, Matt. They do a lot of things. 24 hours seem pretty little for all of that activity.
Yeah. Well, and 2 kids, right? Like the 3-year-old and the 3-month-old.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Time is the most important commodity these days.
Very true. And that links back to our initial conversation about RTDs. And, if you don't have the time to brew, that's maybe then the way out.
There you go.
To get your fix.
It's like you've been doing this before, Norbert. You got the perfect.
I go in circles. I go in circles, right? That's what you mean.
No. Perfect callback. I like it.
Cool, Matt. Well, amazing conversation. A lot of new aspects, I think. A lot of new angles we have not talked before, and I think it's fairly new, especially in the high specialty world. So I think there's a lot of good thoughts in there for reflection and for hopefully, I wouldn't say call to action, but to participate in more opportunities.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm very grateful, Matt, to you and also your company that we can have this conversation in a very relaxed environment, knowing that Nestlé is so big and so powerful in certain ways, and still it's always the people and it's always the personal motivations, and I love to see that, and I congratulate you and Nestlé for that and to that,
Sure.
and I'm very happy to keep the conversation going in the future. Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks, Norbert.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Matt. I learned a lot. It was incredible. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast. To learn more about Cropster, subscribe to this podcast and follow us on social media. For more educational content, visit cropster.com/learn.